All right, I think everyone has joined that's going to be joining our webinar today, so we'll go ahead and get started. Again, my name is Griffin. If you have any questions, everyone's muted, but we do have a chat panel. If you want to post your questions there, either through the session, I will be answering them at the end, and then anything more detailed we can get into probably at a later date. So, all right, let's go ahead and get started. So the first section is about the auto check writing. And the purpose of this utility is, let's say you have a multitude of vendors or suppliers that you have accounts payable transactions in the system for, and you wanted to do a big batch to pay everyone, let's say in January of 2019. So you can do a big run and not have to go vendor by vendor and hit the pay on each of their transactions. You can actually just have the system generate the checks for you, and you go through and choose which ones are getting paid this run or not. So here's a bit of how this tool works, and you'll kind of see it's pretty straightforward. So all I've done is clicked on the write checks and drafts here, and then choosing my checking account that I'm writing the checks out of. So I'll pick my operating account here. So as you see, we've got, whenever you're in the check writer, you're looking at checks written for the current period. You can see the current month and year up here at the top of the accounting module. So you'll see we're in month 8 of 2018. So that's the checks I'm displaying here that were cut in that month. If I'd like to change it from August, let's say, to a different month, you can go to File, Change Current Month and Year. This is a new feature that has come out in accounting. Previously, you had to either contact us or have access to the Company Informations module. But now you can utilize this. You do have to be on version 43.590 here. You can see your version number down here in the bottom right. So if you're not on this most recent version, you won't have this change current month and year quite yet. But that update is coming out soon if you don't already have it. So, but what we'll go ahead and do is click on the auto check writing box down here at the bottom. And all it's done is it's populated down here some fields that we can search by. So what we're doing here is we're basically telling the system, okay, what ranges of entities or GL accounts do we want to write checks for? And it's really an all or nothing type situation. So it's either going to choose every entity in that GL account or every transaction in that entity range, regardless of GL account. There's no picking and choosing until after the tool's run. But that's fine because you pick and choose which checks to be paid after the search is done, and it disregards and leaves the other balances there and doesn't do anything with them. So let's go ahead and start. We'll go ahead and pick a profit center. So one profit center at a time. We'll start with our A. I can put an entity range in here, like depending upon how your entities are labeled. Maybe they all start with a 1, and the ending number maybe is 9. So like let's say they're 6 digits, you could do something like this, and that should grab everything. But if you have like alphanumeric suppliers or things like this where they're called NTP, that numeric range really isn't going to capture them. So I actually prefer to leave the entity ranges blank. Because if I'm only trying to pay one specific entity, it's easier to just add the check and do it manually from the main portion. But if I'm doing a range, usually it's on a GL account. So if I pick a GL account, I believe one of our accounts payable here is 2100. So what this is going to do is it's going to grab every accounts payable transaction in the GL 2100. So I can even set an ending due date. So maybe I'm only paying up through things owed up to January 15th. 2019. So any balances generated or accrued after the 15th of January are not going to populate in this search. And then if it's a virtual credit card transaction, where we're not cutting a check and it's just basically going to be an auto draft, you can check that as well. But if we're actually going to be printing checks, and these aren't just ACH drafts, we want to go ahead and leave that box unchecked. So what we'll do is we'll go ahead and run it like this, and let's see how many transactions we've got actually in there. 183. So as you can imagine, it's not just 183 accounts payable transactions. This is 183 separate entities in the system that have balances due up until January 15th of 2019. So now that I've run your utility, you can see every vendor that we have an outstanding balance with is going to populate in this window. Some may have an auto pay amount attached to their entity record, which you can set in the CRM. Otherwise, they're all going to start with a $0 balance, because then it's up to us to decide, are we going to pay this check? So why don't we start at the top and go through, and you'll see kind of what this what these do. Now, before we get started, we have some selections here. We have the print invoices due, which is going to print a copy of basically all of the accounts payable owed in this window. So you're going to basically get, a page per vendor of each of these. Now, print invoices selected, you can use this tool once you've gone through and actually marked pay, because right now these all show 0 as an amount, so they're not selected. But once I've actually set amounts in here, and let's say I set to pay half of these 187 vendors, I should have about 90, 93 or so in my invoices selected once I've actually gone through and hit the pay. So usually you'll want to do that afterward. Then you can print your check remittances after that. But then the final flag to go ahead and flag these checks as printed is to hit this print checks button. And that's actually going to trigger the routine to print out. So depending upon how your checks are set up, if it's stub, check, stub, or just check, or you have maybe check and then a paper copy for the copy that can print out, you'll want to make sure your printer is loaded correctly when this print routine runs, because it's going to do, one check at a time for as many as that you have selected to print here. So we'll go ahead and start with this ABC bus one. And go from there. So if you see ABC Bus has 3 balances that we owe to them, all from earlier in 2018, probably with some late fees. But at this point, I'm just going to go ahead and mark pay all for this check. I can give it a specific check number if I select auto draft, otherwise it's going to use my next check number. And then we'll move on. So I'll go ahead and go to these added by conversion entities. This is going to tell me the transaction date does not match. Do I want to continue without correcting? No, I'll go ahead and fix that. Since we're currently in month 8 of 2018, that's why my month and year are stuck on those 2 dates. But if I go ahead and set this to month 2 of 2019, now that matches the transaction date of the check. So we shouldn't get that error going again. Okay, so these added by conversion entities, obviously this is a demo database, so don't know how real these transactions are, but let's say I wanted to go ahead and clear these out as well, pay all, and move on. Let's say I wanted to skip this next one. Oh, I gotta fix my date and range here. Okay, but let's say this second one here, I do not want to pay. Okay, I want to actually go through here and skip this one because you can see I don't know what these balances are coming from. So just leave it blank and continue on. So now we'll go to my Amex card. We have $1,100 on our Amex. We'll go ahead and mark pay all, save it, fix my date range here, save, and then continue forward. So basically, you'll see the checks you've written, but just when you click on it, the amount will not populate until you've actually printed the check. But you can see you can very quickly go through and mark pay all on quite a few of these. Now, you probably want to be in the correct month so you don't keep getting that message like I do. But for the most part, it's pretty straightforward. And you'll go ahead and go through this entire list, and any checks you leave blank and don't assign values to, it's not going to print a check for them. So don't be afraid seeing a name in here. If one of these vendors is not marked to be paid, it's not actually going to generate a check for them if you didn't actually hit pay on any of their outstanding APs. But at this point, as soon as the run is done and you're ready to go ahead and print, you'd hit print checks. That'll trigger a print routine for each of the checks we did. So I think we did about 3 or 4. So that should trigger those 4 to go out. And if I hit cancel, it undoes this process and basically gets us back to scratch. So if I hit cancel, you can see the auto check writing has been stopped, and then I can start it over again. So you can start and stop the auto checks as many times as you want, but only when you print those checks does it actually finalize what's happening in this routine. So you can see I can start right back over where I was, and I'm back to square one. So pretty straightforward. It's really only relevant if you have a ton of different vendors that you have outstanding AP to. If you only have maybe 3 or 4, it may be faster to just do those one at a time. But this can be very helpful if you've got a big stack of vendors that need to be paid and you don't want to have to search them up one by entity number. Okay, and then always, I would print an invoice is selected before printing. That way you can verify, make sure that, for every invoice you have selected, you have an equivalent check, and that'll go all the way through. So. And again, I do see some Q&A questions. Definitely please write those in. We'll touch base on all of those and circle back to them at the end. But thank you. Yes, please, any questions, feedback you have, let me know and we'll revisit. So yeah, at that point, this check writer, if you're not doing one by one hand checks, this auto check writing can definitely save you some time. But then, of course, don't worry about any of the balances that are still out there. The next time you do an auto check writing batch, they will still be in here as long as they meet the parameters of your search that you do. Okay, and then to turn off auto check writing, you just click the box again. So that's it. So now let's go ahead and move on to the next section of our accounting features is our daily deposit screen. So the daily deposit screen is a summary of every cash, check, credit transaction, everything that's hitting a clearing account. So your clearing account is a temporary holding for the cash collected or the cash flow coming through the system at your dealership, and it's going to eventually get deposited in some sort of bank deposit to your bank. So some people will ask, well, how do these transactions come over into clearing? Generally, a clearing balance is going to happen when a deposit is taken on a service ticket or a deal, or a invoice in parts and service is cashed out. Now, obviously, manual accounting transactions can hit a clearing account as well. What you're looking for is a debit or credit to any one of the clearing accounts listed in here. So if you look, I've got an 1,000 clearing account, which is my just general clearing. I've got a 1020, which is my credit card clearing, and I also have a 1210 cash credit or check clearing. And I might even have some more in here. I have a 1010 rental clearing. You may have a handful. The easiest way to know is if you're in your GL account screen. If you come over here to account type, you can type in CL and see all the clearings that you may have. You may not be utilizing all of these, but you may want to look into disabling some of those if you're not using them. And to find out what parts of the system are going to be using these fields, essentially it's going to be looking at the accounting summary setups for parts and service and for finance. So if I look at my pay types in parts and service, here are each pay or cash out type that can be selected when we're cashing out an invoice. So you'll see there's third party on account, American Express, some other items, etc. And in your system, you're going to have a GL account assigned to each. So you can see the 1020 is attached to our MasterCard, ePay, and Visa accounts, as well as our Amex and Discover. My extended warranty has 1105, and my cash, check, coupon, and some of these others actually don't have one, which looks wrong. So in the setups, you should have a GL account per cash out type. Otherwise, when a end user cashes out an invoice and uses one of those pay types, the transaction is going to be out of balance and isn't going to post, and it will need to be corrected. So, for my cash clearing, well, I'm just going to use my general 1,000. I think I do remember seeing a check clearing. So let's do. If I do a search here, I hit my little ellipsis. If I click on account type, I can actually search for exclusively clearing accounts. So there's my cash check clearing. And then maybe my coupons I want going to 1,000 Canadian dollars, fine going to 1,000. And I'll just go ahead and fill the rest of these out. Now on account, generally it's going to be some sort of accounts receivable transaction, right? So 1,100 is our general parts and service ones. And the third party on account, we can use 1,100 there as well. So I've filled out my clearing accounts on my demo environment. Hopefully yours is all populated as well. But those would be the automatic transactions that populate into this clearing account generated from the parts and service and or deal desking modules. Okay. So now that we've identified how balances get in here, I'm going to show you how they can be cleared out as well. Here's another one. Let's say I make a manual transaction. So that you can see here the most recent transaction that's hit this account is back in September of last year. Well, let's add one. So if I go ahead and minimize my bank deposit, well, actually, let's go ahead and get out of it since there's no refresh. Actually, there is a refresh now. That's nice. Exit, I'm not going to save. Okay. If I make a manual transaction to that GL, let's say I hit the add button down here at the bottom, and then I'm going to make a general journal entry. You could even put it into cash receipts, right? Where we've received cash for something. So I can say into GL 1000, my clearing account, we're going to call this, we can just call it rental revenue, I suppose. So let's say a customer gave, or let's call it storage revenue. Let's say a customer, actually I don't know if we have storage, we'll find out. They gave us $150 because they're storing their unit. Usually you could do an invoice for this or some sort of AR invoice, but if I just wanted to make the transaction, I can debit our clearing account for $150. offsetting it to possibly maybe a revenue account showing where we generated that revenue. So I'm going to do a search here and see if we either have storage revenue. Nope, just probably rental. Obviously, we have the sales GLs and all, but I'm just going to use rental revenue as an example. So if I use this revenue rental here, now I can show that we received $150 from a customer. What for rental revenue? I could even tie their entity number to it. So maybe Mr. Greer here is the entity that's renting from us. I can place that entity on there. And then now I can show that that debit is received. And I can even put comments in here. Mr. Greer, February. I can't spell February. February revenue for rental. You could even put the stock number if it was once owned by, your dealership to show, hey, this is a unit that we're, or, a current vehicle we're renting out. So you can track the revenue generated from that stock number. So maybe I'll do that on my revenue line. I'll search up a Forest River RPOD. And we'll go back to my rental revenue. That's fine. Okay. So with this transaction and this debit into my clearing account, if I go ahead and save this, I got to fix my dates and month. So this is a February transaction. I should be putting it into February 2019. We'll go ahead and save this. And now, if I go into my daily deposits, you will see that $150 debit that we received. So great, we collected as $150. We're going to put that into our checking account at the end of our day. So the way you consolidate your deposits and remove balances out of here, we will do a few ways. First off, if you need to do research, you can always find out what's going on by hitting the plus sign to find out where a transaction came from. So as I hit this plus sign, you're going to see there's no cash out tied to this. Well, that immediately tells me that this was a manual transaction coming from accounting because we didn't hit the cash out screen. So the only way this could have hit this clearing account was a manual debit or credit into the account. In this case, it's a positive number, it's a debit. If I further hit the plus sign, it'll show me the exact reference number to the transaction. And if I hit the V button on it, there's no document tied to it, right? So the only way to find where this is coming from would be to use that reference number and perhaps come down here to the screen number. I could type in R, storage, revenue, and you'll see in my search results behind us, that's where that transaction is coming from. So essentially, if there's no document, like no parts invoice, no service invoice, and it's a manual transaction, you're going to need to use that reference number to possibly research where that came from. As opposed to, if I come in here for, let's say, this amount, you can see that this was cashed out via cash, so we should expect $529.89 in cash value in our drawer. And if I hit the plus sign again, I can see the transactions that generated this. Now you'll see there's two in here. So the system is going to sum equivalent cash out types together because they went to the same GL, right? So both of these transactions debited the 1,000 rather than having a line for each of them. The system is just going to sum them. So let's say you had two separate cash piles because one customer gave you the 553 cents and another customer gave you $29. Well, when you're in the screen, you can't look for those independently. You have to look at them summed because, the system's just going to add them all up. So if the total value of cash collected for 10/18, make this real easy on yourself. Go ahead and put the date in here and let's put in, let's say 10/18/2018. You can see, okay, for the entire day, I should have, in my cash account, collected $529.89. If there's a discrepancy there, either the drawer balance was wrong or you overcollected, and it needs some research. But it's very easy to itemize by day when you use this filter here. So if I'm balancing my drawer for the end of February 14th, again, use your date, and everything we would have collected for that day would be right here. And if it's not here, either it didn't get cashed out in the system or recorded in the system somewhere or something else is going on. So I like filtering by day, especially because daily deposits are usually done by day, so it makes it really easy. Another example is this. Let's say I'm filtering for 9/26/2018. So if I put one day in here, you'll see there's two separate GL accounts in here. Well, one is a credit card clearing, so this would be the sum of all our credit card transactions cashed out for the day, whereas our 1,000 is the cash account. So if I hit my plus sign here, here's the $500 cash we received on a deposit, And then if I hit the plus sign here, here's where we received a check for $30,000 or possibly multiple checks. Let's find out. Nope, just one. And then my MasterCard transaction was just a single deposit put on the MasterCard for $500. So knowing how to utilize and filter this screen can make it easy. So let's say today was September 26th, and I'm taking my bank deposit to the bank. And the total of my deposit is the $31,541.80. So what I'd be doing is I'd first pick up here at the top the checking account that we're debiting. So I'm going to say we're going to put it into our operating account. The reference number for the transaction. My recommendation would be use the date somewhere in the reference because that really helps tie in, when that happened. You can always look at the transaction date, but the reference is helpful. And then I'm going to say DD or daily deposit, right? So I can very easily see that on my check register. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this and backdate my transaction date because we are, in the past debiting this. And I'm going to change my month and year to 9/2018. So everything up at the top looks good, and that's ready for me to be posting. So I'm going to take both of these transactions and send them over to today's deposit. So I'm going to highlight it and click the little arrow. Okay. If I hit the double arrow, it's going to send everything over, which I don't want. I just want my one transaction. So if I hit the double arrows down here, it puts everything back, and then I can do these one at a time. So if you send everything over, you can either close out of the screen and come back in, or just use the arrow, and not save, or just use the arrows. It'll get you back to where you were. So now here's my screen of my deposit, and this is accurate to what we're taking to the bank today. If it wasn't, I'd want to do a bit of research to find out why this is over or under what was collected. Perhaps the transaction date was wrong, or someone double cashed out and, charged someone twice. I don't know. We'd need to look into it. But assuming this is the correct balance for what you debited to your checking account, at this point, we would just hit the deposit button down at the bottom. You're going to see that it credits all three line items individually out of the clearing account and debits them all into one line item into my checking account. At this point, you're going to want to hit the Save button. And now, if I went into my reconciliation and I checked my operating account and I filter for that day, 09/26/2018, you're going to see it looks like there was another transaction done on that day. Pull it, it looks like maybe a check for $500, but there's our debit right there. And then when I see that on my bank statement, I'd clear that, knowing that, that matches my statement amount. So my statement, as long as we're plugging it in up here at the top, will help us balance to everything that's been cleared through the system. We'll probably cover the check register in a separate webinar, but it's important to just know that your deposits are always headed basically to whichever checking account that you choose up here on the top. So if we debit clearing automatically from other parts in the system, all those balances will accrue here and they will stay here and never make it to your checking account until someone tells the system, yes, we actually transfer that money. Now, a lot of dealerships will ask, why do we need to use a clearing account? Why can't we just directly push all the money to the checking account? Because then it's very hard to reconcile if there's mistakes, if something came over incorrectly. Because things are so fluid, there's less control and the mistakes don't get caught until the reconciliation is done. And that can be done maybe just once a month or maybe twice a month. Whereas clearing, you should be checking this screen every day. Because if there's transactions that can't be identified, why do we really collect $900,000 on October 5th? Well, let's look. It looks like the MasterCard and Visa transactions look pretty regular, but $900,000 for a check, we either received some heavy funding or this was a mistake and we need to research it. So definitely having a daily, audit of what's going in and out of the checking account and verifying that all the transactions in this screen match physically what the dealership is doing by both counting your cash drawers and the checks, created or cashed out for the day. Having a second set of eyes is going to help, because otherwise, if everything's just going to the reconciliation, then you're really working through a reconciliation screen to clean up and research problems rather than catching the problems before they even make it to the checking account, right? The easiest part about a reconciliation is putting in your bank statement balance and then just clearing everything as you see it on the statement. Assuming everything's there, perfect. Anything that is missing or is doubled up, then research from there. If all of these transactions didn't start in clearing and they just automatically went over there, it's it's much harder to keep it, in line, and there's, it's more of a full-time job to reconcile than when you've got someone monitoring the daily deposits and filtering out the bad data before it even hits your checking account. Okay, so that's pretty much this screen. Again, let's say I go to make some changes and I go to send stuff over and then I realize I've made a mistake and I don't know where I made a mistake, but I haven't saved. Well, I would just hit the exit, don't save your deposits, and then when you go back in, it's going to be right back to where you were. As long as you don't hit that deposit button and save, it's always going to put you back to everything being in there. Okay, and then all that daily deposit screen is doing is if you look in the ledger, and I go to 09.26.18 DD, oh, I think I did it a little bit different. I think I did 09.26.2018. Yep. With me searching up that transaction, you'll see all the deposit screen is doing is just like our manual transaction. It's just crediting those transactions that are in there and debiting the checking account. Now, here's something to be aware of that I've found. If someone has like a balance in here that should not be in here, let's say you double cashed out somebody and this $100 transaction that's in credit card clearing on the 19th is wrong. Okay, so what that means is someone accidentally cashed out twice $100. Well, first we'd want to find out where that transaction came from. So this invoice here, 120990, and let's hit V to go ahead and get an idea of where this came from. So it was a $100 deposit, or I'm sorry, a $100 deductible coming off of this warranty ticket. So if I look at the accounting transactions here, of course it's been reposted a handful of times, but that's okay. Let's look at the most recent posting. So you'll see here, our $100 deductible didn't go into clearing from this transaction. It probably went in from the very first one. Nope, there's our estimate. Let's see, I'm just going through here. I know I picked a kind of crazy one. Looks like someone reposted this a handful of times. Here we go. So right there into our suspense account went our $100, and then there's going to be another transaction in here basically stating where that $100 went into clearing. Okay, so with that transaction, what we want to show is right there, there's our suspense cash out. Okay, so what we want to show is that we collected money and it looks like for warranty revenue. Right? Well, what if we cash that out twice and it should not be in there? As just, I'm just saying as an example. So really, this isn't $100 additional. $100 additional of revenue that should not be in the clearing account that actually is, and we need to do a reversing entry to get it out of there. Well, it's important to always utilize the reference number, to match up things, and I'll show you how to do that manually. Okay, so to get that out of there, you don't want to just delete the original transaction. Otherwise, I mean, yes, that just accidentally overcharged $100. Well, to undo that, you could do a simple manual entry. So I'm going to add to my Z1 journal for my general journal. I'm going to say, so this is in GL account 1020, so I'm going to say 1020, we're going to credit out $100. Okay, so take out that 100 that was additional. And I'm going to use the same reference number that's being referenced here, 120990. Okay, and then rental revenue was, or I'm sorry, warranty revenue was the offset to this 100, right? We collected $100 deductible, offset to warranty revenues in service. So if I go down here to our, and I don't know if this was part sales or labor, should it be equivalently split? Since it was a deductible, it really doesn't apply so much. But what I'll do is I'll say, let's just split it down the middle. Let's say we have part sales for warranty, and then we have labor sales for warranty. Again, I'm just filtering for revenue accounts, scrolling down here and finding some labor sales for warranty. So I have two revenue accounts here that I'm going to equally split out the $50 that was over collected, right? So we're basically reducing revenue or debiting a credit account to reduce revenue by the same amount. All right, I'm going to now back post this to October 26th, the same date that the original transaction was posted. And then I'm going to make the reference number. I'm going to call this correction to the invoice number 120990. Because that's our reference number we have here. So now with this saved, if I refresh this, if I look on 10/26, you can see I have oh, I'm sorry, it was the 19th, wasn't it? I'm using the completely wrong date. So, well, okay, let's go find it. So let's go to correction 120990. There's our transaction. Let's just get it on the exact day that the correction's for. As long as it's in the same month, that's usually fine. But I like being on the same day, and here's why. So if I refresh this, if you look, you see how there's a line item for $0? Well, it's not truly 0. It's actually 100 minus 100. So it equates out to 0, but it's actually going to sit here in clearing. Well, if you want to remove that line item and get rid of that cleared balance that we removed out of there, you can simply move it over to here and hit save. It is going to require a reference number, so I can say, what do we call that? Correction 120660. I will make the same transaction date back to the 19th of October, and then go ahead and do my save. Now, since I'm actually depositing, it's going to ask for a checking account, but it's a $0 balance, so it's actually not going to go anywhere. I didn't hit the deposit button, so we didn't see that go away. Let's just do that so you can see it in finality, and then we'll touch on our last features option in the drill down reporting. I'm going to call this correction, if I can spell it right, 120660. Okay, now hit the deposit button. You'll see that nothing is being added to the checking account, but it is taking these two line items out of my clearing account. So now when I go back into my daily deposits, 1019 doesn't show up here, so we cleared it. So you can kind of see the corrections, if you need to remove items out of here, but we do need to reduce, the offsets to the revenue or the monies collected. So if we collected $100, we need to find out what for. And then to get that out of there, either A, go find the invoice that was incorrect and void it, or make an accounting transaction that's going to fix it. In this case, we determined that whole invoice wasn't wrong. We just double charged the customer for $100. So we could probably do a card return and then do what we did, is make a balancing manual transaction to fix it. So keep in mind, anything you do in here, just find the offending transaction and work your way back, and it should usually make sense. But it's important to know where transactions are being debited into this account or credited, for example, and that's why I always make sure your pay types are set up correctly, because that's going to be majoritively how items are hitting your clearing account. So check these, make sure they're all right, and that's going to tell you where these items are coming from when they hit the daily deposit screen. All right, lastly, we have a new feature here called the drill down reporting. Some of you may have seen this in some of your more recent reports. But what this is it's the ability to click on a certain reference number or a certain GL account transaction and actually dive in and find out what's happening on it. So let me give you an example. If I go in here and I pull my profit and loss for let's say a particular month. Let's say January of 2018, right? I'm starting my audit of all my 2018 numbers, and I want to make sure everything's correct. So I'm just going to run it for, let's say, all departments. That's fine. We're going to go ahead and hit Show Report. So I'm looking at January of 2018's profit and loss report. So there's quite a few reports that drill down reporting has been added to. Not everyone, of course, but the majority of accounting reports, you're going to start seeing a blue link. So that blue link is actually what we call drill down reporting, and it allows you to dive into that GL account and look at what balances were creating that. So in here, if you look at our very first line, we have rental revenue of $500 in my January 2018 P&L. Okay, so if I click on the GL account here, GL number 4000, it's going to run a report for me, and it's going to show me the balances in that account that generated that $500 transaction. So it's going to do a GL detail research and show me, here's a credit, it's coming from an AR invoice, it's a bus lease for 12 months, and they must have a monthly payment of $500 tied to this stock number. And then I could even further drill this down by clicking on this or this entity number, finding all transactions tied to that entity, or perhaps find all transactions tied to that stock number or just this entity reference. Then if I'm done looking into that, I can get out of it, go back to my P&L and review. Well, it looks like we've got a lot of new vehicle revenue that looks good there. But maybe I want to dive in and see why we have negatives for internal service, right? We should have had at least something positive in revenue. That looks to me like a reverse transaction. So if I want to dive in, maybe I click on the dollar amount instead. And that should take me to the specific transaction as well. So you have a lot of freedom, to kind of click and choose which type of searching you do. So here we found it. So it looks like there's a positive and negative in here. So that's a voided ticket. But then I see two also voids for the same stock number. So perhaps maybe this was voided work that never had a positive offset, or maybe the positive offset's in a different month and we're not finding it. So these two transactions look okay together, but these two I might want to see, why are they only negatives? Should we have positives in there for those? So again, I can dive in. Maybe I want to find out more of what Robert and Donna Decor have done in the accounting side of things in our system. So I can click on their entity number specifically and then dive right into basically every transaction they have. So now I'm doing a research, and here's every transaction we've ever done. So we can see all the clearing transactions, so all the monies they've given us, all the receivables we have outstanding with them, parts purchases tied to that entity. You get a lot of control over diving into these accounting reports. And you'll see that majoritively, when you click on the drill down, it's almost always running the research report. But what it's doing is it's running the research report with the appropriate filters to help you find what you're looking for. So it definitely is meant to help you research items. Now, we'll have drill down reporting on the balance sheet as well, and quite a few of the other accounting reports. Not every one of them, I can say, but a good amount of them, especially some of these high-level financials that you might need to dig into to find out where balances are coming from. Again, maybe I have a very high, maybe I'm seeing my commissions and that looks very high for the month because that's over 58% of the current percentage of our expenses for the month. So that's pretty high, and I want to make sure that, did we truly pay out that amount in commissions, in which case I will dive into that GL. It should show me the $47,000 that has debited that expense for the month, and then I can kind of cross-reference it maybe with all the deals that we've posted. You can see that we're seeing a lot of the same dollar amount and then some negatives to it, so those are usually the deals reposting. But then I can just go through deal by deal. The deal number is going to be the entity reference number here, so you can see that there's all of these commission lines are from one deal. You can see deal number 1106 or 969 all the way down to this record. So basically every one of these is either a different salesperson, or you can see there's some negatives and positives, so it looks like the deal was reposted a few times. So as you all know, probably know, anytime transactions get reopened and reposted, it can cause a headache for you to find out how many should go where. So it's really just going to be doing the math. So if you look here, I have two negative 199, I have 187 cents, 187. Well, that'll balance out with two of these, but then I'm still showing two deposits, two commission amounts for this finance manager, one for 199.87, one for 199.88. So did he truly get two separate commission lines, or is this deal posted one too many times? With this type of knowledge, now I know to go check that deal and start reviewing the accounting transactions and see, do we have an additional posting here, or is this correct? There's a good example of someone who's, it's not overposted. So the finance manager has 3 total transactions tied to him in this dollar amount. One is a negative and 2 is a positive. So one of those negatives and the positives are going to equate to 0, and the positive should be his outstanding balance. So again, just a good research tool here. Rather than having to go pull this report yourself, you can utilize these financials and these high-level reports to give you the the overview, and then if you really need to dig into it, you can drill down into the report or the GL account and find where those balances came from. All right, so there's really not much else to talk about there. I'm sure we're going to be adding additional functionality to the drill down in terms of more reports that have it, but I do know there's quite a few right now that utilize it, and if there's questions or issues you have, let us know. But what I'm going to go ahead and do now is I'm going to back out and check the Q&A panel and see if there's any questions that are relevant to our session, and then give you guys like maybe 5 minutes or so of just Q&A if you have anything additional. So in the Q&A panel, Angelica is asking, why doesn't the amount in the left-hand list update after selected? That would be helpful. That's a good question, Angelica. So the amounts in the check writer are always with a check that has actually been finalized. So let's show an example. So if I change my current month and year to, let's say, January of 2019, just so we get some fresh data here. Let's see if there's any checks written in January. Of course there's not. So let's flip it back. Let's go change current month and year. Oh, don't have permissions tied to that. Well, that's okay. So let's go back to month 12 of 2018. There's got to be something written out, hopefully in our demo environment for that month. Well, I'm just going to work my way back until I find something. Nothing. Okay, let's go back to, it looked like September was probably the last time this demo has really been getting used. So back in September, if we look in there checking, we had one check that had been written, check number 182. Well, if you see, because this check has been, it's in this green status letting me know that it's printed, we can see the amount here, right? The reason we don't see the amount on those other checks is the status hasn't been marked as one of our done statuses, so either printed, cleared electronic, or cleared manual. When the check is in a not printed status, technically the amount is not there yet. So the auto check writer, if you want to see all the balances of the checks that you have outstanding, that's where you're going to want to print the invoices due, because that's actually going to show you the amounts owed and the amounts you have marked paid in the invoices selected screen. So usually what I'm going to say is get all the checks there that need to be potentially cut. Definitely utilize going through here in the list, but really the other question is the amount shows on not printed for us. So in a check here, so some of the amounts that you may be seeing in here, while it's still a not printed check, you can see a lot of these are zero, but NTP actually has an amount here of $16 outstanding or $50 outstanding. The reasons you'll see these amounts sitting here automatically is actually coming from the entity itself. If I go to add modify entity here on this entity record, and I check my accounts payable, yes, in your live system when you prepare a check before printing, so the check writer utility versus the auto writer is probably populating it just because you have one check that you're preparing. I think because the reason, there's so many checks here, it's not populating the amount yet until you actually run and print the checks. In your live system, when you're printing just one check, the system only has one record outstanding, one check in the left panel of the window, the current check that you're working on. It's probably just something to do with the active records, more kind of programming related items than front end. I definitely could see it being useful seeing all the ones you have marked, because then it's easy to isolate which ones you have set to mark as paid versus ones that haven't. My recommendation would just be, if you're curious to see all the ones you have flagged, I would just do the print invoices selected. That's going to be the best resource to see which ones you've worked on so far. And you can continue printing it out as you go through. So you can do it maybe a quarter of the way through to see what you've gotten, then maybe all the way when you're done to see and make sure everything's marked out. So we have added a new ideas board that's going to be kind of our utility to track all outstanding, requests for changes in the system or new programming updates. So my recommendation, if that's something that would help you out, if you're going to utilize this utility, go to our idea board and mention, hey, it's difficult for us to see what the outstanding amount is on our checks. If there's a way that we could see that prior to the print run, that could possibly help you out on this utility. So. Definitely a good suggestion, and I could definitely see how that could, be confusing seeing the zeros there. I've just always defaulted to printing the invoices selected and, utilizing that as your tool. So, but definitely a good question. Thank you. And then real quick, if you do see amount pre-populated here, the reason why is there is a payment amount default here. So if you set a dollar amount in this payment amount default on an entity and the AP info screen, that's going to be the default amount that the system assumes when you go to pay this vendor. So maybe every time we pay Raymo Design, it's for $50 and no more than $50. Well, then it's going to default to that every single time. And that can be useful to make sure that a certain vendor isn't overpaid based on the credit terms that you all have with them and they have with you. That's something that you can set up. So. But I don't see any other questions coming through here. I'm going to kind of keep the screen open. I'm going to leave it open here for the next probably five minutes or so. So if you guys have anything else, definitely let us know. Otherwise, I thank you all for your time and the questions that were asked. We do have another webinar coming up here shortly. If you give me just a moment, I'm going to find the exact dates here. Usually I believe they've been on Tuesdays and Thursdays for the most part. And if I look, our next one here is a F&I features, same time, 1 p.m. Eastern. And this is going to cover rebates and spiffs and creating consignment payables. So, you know, the spiffs generated from rebates from either factory rebates or manufacturer rebates, and then creating consignments when you sell a deal on a consignment unit, how that can automatically generate a payable to the owner of that vehicle that, you know, did the, consign that unit to you. All right, and that's the only one I see. Let me see if there's one scheduled for Thursday. Yep, there's another one on Thursday, same time, 1 p.m. Eastern, covering unit inventory features and how to use the unit purchase ordering system. All right, so hopefully these webinars have been helpful for you all. We're going to be, like I said, posting the recordings on our website. So, you know, if you didn't catch all of it or you wanted to use this as a resource or a training tool, look out. We'll be sending those links in some marketing here shortly, and you'll get a chance to review. All right, thank you all. Like I said, I'll keep the question and answers open for a little bit. To answer what I can. I see another here question from Lisa. It says, if you find a mistake in the daily deposit screen and determine that you need to manually clear the item out, what happens to the clearing account? So there's a reason I didn't really mention that button, and you know, I was hoping we'd get through this without it, but you know, here we are. So I will go ahead and mention it. The clearing tool is a bit dangerous, and I'll mention why. I can clear balances from this screen and make it go away. But the confusion I think on this tool is when someone sees a balance in here, like let's say this $120 balance on 10/16. Let's say this is already in my checking account, right? I already deposited 100. Yes, Lisa, the long answer or the short answer is yes. It'll still be in the clearing account. And the problem is it goes away from the screen. So while everything looks right here, your balance sheet is actually still going to have that dollar amount, either negative or positive, sitting in there incorrect, waiting for you to attend to it. So, you know, let's use this as an example. This $120, I'm showing that we already deposited into my bank account. I see it on my statement. You know, I verified in both my bank account and in the system's reconciliation that it's sitting there. So I want to, quote unquote, manually clear this. Well, to make it go away from the screen, I just simply hit the manually clear button down here, navigate to that transaction. I'm going to use the date of 10/16 here to find it quickly. There it is, $120 debit. So if I click on the clear button here and I say save, that balance is gone. So now my daily deposit screen looks great. However, if I ran a GL report on that clearing account, that $120 is still sitting in there as a debit. So while your daily deposit screen may look good, you're going to get caught at the end of the year sometime when the balance sheet is being audited, because all those balances are still sitting out here, and now that so much time has passed, it's that much more research to be done to find out why that transaction got cleared, why it was already in the reconciliation, and you know what we need to do to fix it. So yes, you can manually clear items from this screen, but generally that's not the correct way to correct it. I would dive into where that transaction came from and decide, do we need this transaction or should I void it out? Because if we don't void it, this manually clear isn't making it go away. It's still going to be in that that account on the balance sheet. So if I go run a GL detail, I will still see that $120. It's not just erasing it. Okay, so the manually clear can help out fix this screen, but it doesn't fix probably the underlying problem that the transaction is either a duplicate or shouldn't exist. And you may ask, well, then what is the purpose of a manually cleared items utility? I'll use an example. Let's say you all had an open deal in your previous system before you decided to move to the Infinity accounting system, and a customer took a deposit on a deal for $1,000, right? So you guys transitioned from your old system into our system, but you know, we need to recreate that deal, right? Because the deal's still open in the middle of your move from one, accounting system to another. So we need to recreate that deal in our system. But in your financials, when you transfer accounting systems, you bring in your current financials, so everything is pretty seamless. But in our system, our deal doesn't have a deposit on it. So what would we be doing to get that deposit on there? You would take a deposit, have that balance come over here and manually clear it, because technically you already have that. Well, the deal needs that deposit on there, but we can still void the transaction out after the deal is done. But in the temporary period while that deal is waiting to be done, you can clear daily deposits so it's clean, but you would still have to, at the end of the day, void that transaction. So this manual clear items box is not going to fix any problems you have. It's just going to make the deposit screen look like you don't have any. So, and in the efforts of keeping good accounting practices and keeping things clean, I would rather research and find out the offending transaction as soon as possible, rather than clearing it and having to deal with it later on in the year, because then you're just going to have to dig through that many more months, that many more transactions to find out what exactly happened or what needs to happen going forward. So yes, you can use the manually clear items, but I would use it very sparingly, because there's very few live scenarios that I would see needing to utilize that. If the transaction needs to be erased, I would void it, because that's both going to clear it from this screen and get it out of the ledger if it shouldn't be there. So this is kind of like a half fix, usually used for some items, when you're transitioning from one accounting system to the next. It's more of a, one-off utility that's used in very small niche examples, but not overall to keep this screen clean. I hope that makes sense, Lisa. I kind of went on a bit about it, but I've had to deal with some dealerships who basically cleared out their daily deposits using the manually clear item for over a year, and then wondering why their balance sheet was all wacky because their daily deposit screen looked just fine. So I'd prefer that button didn't exist at all, and we actually do have some permissions restricting users from using it. So generally in new installations, I like to restrict it, unless someone needs to use it for some weird reason. I pretend like it's not there. So I hope that answers your question, and hopefully that'll help some other users in the future potentially stay away from that in case they've been using it. All right. Thank you again, though. That's a good question, and definitely something I wanted to avoid, but it's worth bringing up, because at the end of the day, people need to know what it can do and what it can't do, and what it won't do is fix a duplicate transaction, because that GL balance does still sit there. So, all right. Well, thank you all again for your time.